Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
Hello, Mike. How are you?
I'm excellent, thank you, Lorraine. Good morning. Good morning, Stuart.
Morning.
Well, Mike, we'd really like to welcome you to Conveyancing Matters, and thank you for coming on to this chat. I'll ask you in a second to tell our lovely conveyancing audience a little bit about yourself, but I have to say I would just want to stun you with the headline of the week so far, and it's very early in the week. I've just seen on Twitter what is, I think, my favourite headline this year, really. And as this is right in your arena, Mike, I'd love to know what you think. So, agency employee runs dominatrix service from branch office. And what I love about the fact that that this was apparently, according to the Daily Star, a lovely lady who posted on social media, "I'm in the office, pay to see me take off my shoes and socks, losers." But my favourite bit, I think, was the fact that it was in Connells in Hertfordshire.
Excellent. Yeah. Paige and her mother, and it just shows you that it's called diversification, I think, and one of the things that Connells have always been excellent at is making sure that they've got diverse income streams into the business. And as we talk about what's going on, I think we realise that too many businesses are actually very narrow in their way of doing business, and I think that's a fantastic diversification. So good luck to her. I've subscribed.
I love the fact that it says pay to see me take my shoes and socks off.
Oh, there's something for everybody. Whatever rocks your boat, you should see what I get paid for.
I bet the fees are a lot better though.
I hope so.
That's just a handy and accidental segue, Mike, into you telling us about your lovely self, Mike Day, and Integra Property Services. So, kind of, you seem to straddle the property world. So, tell us a bit about yourself and how you got to where you are.
Straddle it or strangle it. I think it's a subtle difference. This is my 1 minute elevator pitch. 45 years in the industry. Started when I was 3. Grew up through the ranks. I became a partner in a firm called AC Frost and Company in the 80s, which we sold to Prudential when the big corporate players were coming into the market. I became the regional director there. When they bailed out in the 90s, I joined Connells, and I had 12 years at Connells, and I was a main board director there. And then 17 years ago, I set up my own business, Integra, and I've got around about 850 clients across the property sector, mainly estate agents, a few conveyancers and a few IT companies and bits and pieces. I'm a chartered surveyor, fellow of the NAEA. In fact, there's more letters after my name than in my name. So I've been around the block. I'm also a director of a business called TechLet, which is a prop tech business, a lettings platform, sales and conveyancing and various other sort of stuff coming down the pipe. So a fairly wide brief in the industry. Also, in my history, I'm probably one of the few people that's acquired 2 firms of solicitors, turned them into licensed conveyancers, and sold them to estate agents. So there's a little claim to fame. Home Fast Property Lawyers, which was a part of a business from Sherrard Solicitors in St Albans, and Conveyancing Direct in Hastings, which is now owned by Connells. So quite a bit of experience in the conveyancing field as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So what, before I hand over to Stu, so specifically then, Mike, you said you've got, some conveyancing firms as clients. So specifically then, because obviously our audience is largely conveyancers, what services do you offer? What do you do for those clients?
I tell them how to work with estate agents. No, I think that it's fair to say that the conveyancing, a bit like estate agency, it ranges now from a few major players, who are highly invested in tech and various other bits and pieces, right down to the one-man band, the guy above the fish and chip shop in the high street. And I think there is perhaps slightly, it's going to be generic, okay, this answer. So there'll be people watching and listening who'll be throwing things at the screen and whatever at the moment. But generically, I think it's fair to say that conveyancers haven't been the best at running businesses Okay, they may be excellent conveyancers, technically excellent, but not necessarily as commercially cute as they could be. And in fact, that's applied to the whole industry, which is why, of course, lawyers have ended up at the lower end of the food chain with people like estate agents and whatever dictating how they operate a little bit through referral schemes and things. So I don't think that they're always as commercially cute as they could be. Now, that's a generalization because there's some fantastically well-run firms and that out there, but that's an overview. And so I help them with that strategy, organization, and where to push the hot buttons when they're working with introducers.
That's interesting. So what's your view on that then, Stu, as someone who's in that hot seat?
I'm not sure what end of the scale we fit, but we have sort of discussed this on the show before, in that I think there's such a wide range of law firms now, like you say, Mike, from the sole practitioner right through to the big corporate boys, owned by sort of private investment companies. So it's such a range now. But one thing I did sort of want to bring up today was the recent press release by bodies within the conveyancing industry, which caused a bit of a conversation on Twitter. And I know you sort of had your own views about the current sort of plight of the property lawyers that are out there and the way that the conveyancing's being done at the moment. So maybe we could sort of have a chat and expand about some of your views on those points.
Of course. I think you're talking about the sort of the view, obviously transactions at this moment in time we know are running at a high level, fueled by government intervention, which arguable that it wasn't necessary, but nevertheless it's happened, and it's certainly fueled volumes and bits and pieces. And clearly there are large parts of the industry, including conveyancing, of course, which bluntly aren't keeping up. And a lot of those pipelines of transactions, if I'm honest, look to be threatened because they're taking too long to go through. We all know that the longer a transaction takes to go through, the higher the risk of it not going through is. I appreciate we've got mortgage lending issues, we've got searches, we've got, there's a whole range of different component parts here. But I think it is fair to say, and again, a generalization, that the conveyancing industry has been slower to react, slower to change than other parts of the industry. We originally were locked down in March, okay, and I still hear stories from my clients of conveyancers who are obviously in many cases working from home, but doing so with pretty poor technology, pretty poor communication, and bluntly slowing things down dramatically. Now, estate agents have a lot to learn as well. Estate agents could have done an awful lot more to get, and there's this phrase now, isn't there, legal ready, to make sure that people are ahead of the game when they bring the property to the market. And I'm a huge advocate of that principle. In fact, when I set up Connell's Conveyancing back in 2000, I think it was, so 20 years ago, we used to instruct the lawyers at the time that the property went on the market. And that was partly really at the time for commercial reasons of getting our hooks into people sooner rather than later. But the byproduct of that was, at the time, it was about a 13-week period to sell a property. Obviously, it's well above that now. In fact, it's nearly double. But we took about 2 weeks off the average length of a transaction time, simply because we got lawyers instructed at the earliest possible stage. That 2 weeks, when you work it through, instead of turning our pipeline 4 times a year, at that moment, we actually turned our pipeline nearly 5 times a year. And so the difference to our bottom line was enormous. It's gone the other way now. And there's an element, and there's a lot of things going on, as you know, to try and play catch up. But it will need the lawyers to play ball.
Well, Mike, can I come in there? Because obviously I saw the exchanges you had on Twitter last week, and I don't think anybody can deny that, expect lots of conveyancing firms, haven't embraced IT as many outside looking in feel they should have done. you know, from the inside looking out, I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think actually the sort of cacophony of noise that you know, firms have to hear when actually they've just got their head down trying to turn the work around is perhaps one of the issues. But one thing I am interested in is there is this sort of general premise, I think, that you know, IT stroke prop tech, whatever you want to call it, is the silver bullet and it's going to make everything better. But I think the reality, Mike, is that particularly right now, you know, firms that have scaled up with the IT are still struggling with volume, time, and turnaround. You know, they're still finding it difficult as well. So how does the, you know, so you know, IT being the panacea isn't necessarily the answer, is it?
No, it isn't. It's part of the answer, so, and as I said, you know, as I said, this is a generic type comment. So, at one extreme, you've got huge investment into technology, and that organisations like Simplify and whatever, massive investment into technology, processing overseas, all sorts of things going on to try and smooth the process. Where the technology should come into play in any business, whether it's a estate agency, conveyancing, whatever, is to do the heavy lifting, is to do the work that doesn't need to be done by a human being, doesn't require the skill set that you would have as a conveyancer or lawyer or whatever. And that is where, you know, prop tech, much overused word, can come into play to free people up to do the bits that they have to do. Now, where I think conveyancers fall down primarily is in communication. I'm currently selling a business on behalf of a client of mine, so it's a commercial transaction, not a residential. But the lawyer responded for an asset agreement to the other side and said, "I'll come back to you." 3 weeks, no communication, and the other side are saying, "Well, what's going on? What's going on?" Now, you know, I know they've been working their whatsits off, getting the job done. They've had meetings with my client. They've been preparing everything. But why don't they just tell people that that's happening so that people understand where they are in the process? The other thing is that, you know, a good estate agent will be able to follow a transaction through. As we know, on a residential conveyance, it basically goes from one side to the other on various bits and pieces all the way through. And a good estate agent will be able to follow that and actually intervene possibly at stages to move things along. It's the communication and the joined up element between agents and conveyancers where, in my view, the biggest issue lies. Some of that can be handled by PropTech.
Yeah, well, that's certainly a conversation we've had on more than one occasion, isn't it, Stu? That general premise about, you know, communication. And actually, at the end of the day, conveyancing is still a people business, isn't it, Stu?
I think, yeah, that's the biggest point I always take from this, that, you know, you can have all the prop tech in the world, but, you know, prop tech doesn't pick up the phone and have that conversation with the client. And that is still the fundamental, you know, I think part of what we do. It's such a personal transaction that, you know, a client does want to talk about what they're buying. You know, we've got case trackers and all that jazz and bits and bobs, but I always think it doesn't actually ever replace anything. It just aids the service we give. It maybe makes it better. It never replaces the need to speak to that client and so on and so forth.
Why are people in the property industry open Monday to Friday 9 to 5 when actually all of their clients are working their whatsies off trying to get the money to pay for everything and whatever else? And actually the best time to get hold of people is, funnily enough, is outside of those hours. And I think there needs to be some real rethinking. I mean, it's too late for where we are at this moment in time, but we should be using this opportunity that COVID presents us with, which has given everybody a big kick up the backside, to rethink our business models going forward. I mentioned I'm a director of Techlet, which is an automated lettings platform. It does all the heavy lifting in a lettings process and whatever. 45% of the things that happen, it gives access to the landlords and the tenants to be able to upload documents and all that type of stuff. 45% of the interactions through the platform take place outside of normal business hours, because that's when people are free to do them. The agent might be closed. If there was a conveyancer, the conveyancer will be closed. So it's how do we create? People are living their life differently now. I order something from Amazon at 7 o'clock at night during the adverts on the football or something, and it arrives at my house at 8:30 the next morning. I mean, that's where we are now. And somehow we've got to find ways of joining that up so that our industry does the same.
I think part of the problem though, and it's sort of the pop tech issue, it's the everything issue, and it's an obvious thing for me to say, Mike, but it's the fragmentation, isn't it? Because, you know, there are some firms, some organisations that have tried, you know, the working out of hours thing, and there'll probably be conveyancers looking at this that are shouting at the screen saying, yeah, we do that. But of course, until you get enough uptake, you know, it's not going to become the industry norm. And of course, to be completely fair, lots of conveyancing firms would say, well, actually, our colleagues, our employees need the work-life balance. You know, they already work very late. You know,
I wasn't suggesting they work 24/7, although it would help.
But it's a totally different mind shift, isn't it? Because the reality is, you may well have to have people almost on shift. You might have to have two lots of people doing the job. And lots of conveyancers, I think, would say in an ordinary market rather than the febrile one we're in now, you know, and this is down to the conveyancers, I have to say, I've said this before, but, you know, there's not enough profit in it to justify doing that.
You said their profit, and of course all businesses have got to operate on a commercially sensible basis. I mentioned right at the outset that lawyers, conveyancers, not so much lawyers actually, generally charge quite well for some of the other type of work they do, but conveyancers in particular, it's become commoditized. Okay, it's become recognised. You know, it's seen as a commoditized product. It's not seen as a legal service as such. It's seen as a commodity, which is probably wrong, but that's the way it is. Estate agents and mortgage brokers, various introducers probably dominate and account for, I don't know, 60% or more of the business that comes into conveyancers comes via some form of introducer. They are often dictating the play in terms of fees and things, and that's been allowed to happen. When this all started 20 odd years ago, because, you know, at Connells, we were the second estate agency group to go into the conveyancing market. Countrywide went in first, but Countrywide did it by acquiring conveyancing operations. They bought a couple of solicitors' firms and set up their own processing plants and whatever. We very quickly looked at that at Connells and said, hey, we like this. We can see we're the catalyst for the process. We can drive this. We can do this, that, and the other. What we didn't want to do was own the means of production. The last thing we wanted to do really was own conveyancers. So we did it via a panel system, which is, you know, is the norm obviously now. So that bluntly, when the market ebbed and flowed, we could ebb and flow with it. We could add more people to our panel to get more capacity. When it went the other way, it wasn't our problem. It was a lawyer's problem, and the lawyers have allowed that to happen a little bit, and they need to be a bit more robust.
I'd say absolutely that lawyers have kind of, allowed the race to the bottom on fees. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned Countrywide. I mean, you know, on the agency side, you know, I was going to ask you, funny enough, how you feel about the fact that it's being reported that some branches won't reopen. I mean, clearly it's grim for the people that work there, and one has an enormous amount of sympathy for them. But certainly on the conveyancing side, Mike, I think it's pretty fair to say that, Countrywide and their like, I would say, on the conveyancing side, you know, haven't enjoyed the, you know, an enormous amount of sort of positive feedback and love, and there's been a bit of reputational damage there really on the conveyancing side. So it's maybe worked financially, but I'm not, you know, nobody I think looks up to that model and says, gosh, yes, that's what we all want to do.
No, I think, which is why we didn't follow it at Connells. The firms remained, the law firms were independent law firms. They just happened to be working under our umbrella, if you like, or under our conveyancing operation. And that was fine. We did go in, we acquired a business called Conveyancing Direct down in Hastings, which Connells still own. What that gave us was the ability to improve the technology. We built our own conveyancing system down there at the time, to a case management processing system, which was pretty good. But what it enabled us to do was cherry pick the business. And so we were able to put the highly profitable business, the good quality business, into conveyancing direct, and send the ordinary business, the less attractive business, bluntly out to panel firms. And that's called running a business. It's done the same with survey work. The big estate agency groups, Countrywide, Connells, LSL, etc., have major surveying operations as part of their makeup. The work comes in primarily, obviously, from lenders on mortgage valuations. And they're now using technology so that a surveyor gets up in the morning, he's already got his day mapped out about where he's going to go for his 4 or 5 appointments. The route is worked out to make it the most profitable, commercially sensible route. And if the job is too far away or not commercially viable, it's panelled out to a surveyor on a fee sharing basis. And I mentioned earlier, My Home Move, Simplify, they have some of their work is done overseas, where it's done in India, where it's a fantastic, same legal system, highly skilled, highly trained people, but they just do the processing, and it's extending their processing capability. Now, mixed views on whether people like the service or whatever else, but they are the largest.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. I always say you should never knock these companies, because obviously you don't understand the inner workings of them. But there's a couple of points. I mean, we open here till 8 o'clock on a Monday night, and the level of emails, calls, general interaction between, say, 6 and 8 is extremely minimal. We were gobsmacked. We did this with a view that we would extend our opening hours across the board, but I can honestly say we haven't seen the demand to do it. We generally work that late anyway, because that's when we do a lot of the work. So the office is manned most of the time anyway. So it was natural for us to then extend the opening of the office and so on and so forth. But we actively try and encourage the clients to come in, if they need to come in, of course, which isn't all that common now anyway. But if they do, to come in, at that time, out of the working hours. The demand's been really, we was gobsmacked at how low the demand was.
Just a quick point on that, and obviously I don't know exactly what you've done and how you've done it or whatever. But extending the opening hours, for example, into an early evening for customer contact should not be a reactive service. That is the time to make proactive calls. So that is the time, that is an outbound time, not an inbound time, in my view. So if I was running an estate agency office today, that period of time, let's say between 6 and 8, would be a time where my staff were making outbound calls to people to do whatever they want to do, update them, whatever else. Not just sitting there on their backsides waiting on the off chance for somebody to phone them. So I think it depends on how it was set up, how it was promoted, obviously.
Well, we obviously use it to process the work, to make the outbound calls. But as a general, the actual uptake on being able to get hold of clients at that time has been poor. And we were just shocked. We just thought the demand would be there for people ringing in, like you say, that couldn't do that during the course of the day because they were working and so on and so forth. So we were quite surprised at it.
Do people want to come into an office anymore? They don't go into estate agency offices. Why would they want to come into a conveyancer's?
There's certain areas of work where they have to be seen face to face. So where we're giving independent legal advice, where there might be sort of limited companies, buy-to-let mortgage products, where they have to come in and see us face to face. We thought, well, naturally, everybody will want to come in the evening. It will be a real sort of niche thing for us, but it didn't work out that way. But
how long did you do it for, Stuart?
We've been continually doing it for about the last 2 years.
So you haven't stopped?
We haven't stopped. No, we haven't stopped, and we won't stop. We use it for the reason you said. We use all that time for making the outbound calls and doing a lot of the heavy work that needs 2 or 3 hours perhaps to look through stuff. So we naturally use it for that time anyway. It's just that we thought, well,
so it's actually beneficial.
Yeah, of course it is. And I'm not knocking it, but in terms of the actual demand for people wanting, as in a client base, our clients don't seem to particularly, want extended opening hours. That's just the experience we've had.
Sure.
We've long.
I admire you for doing it, and I think that I have to say a Monday night, isn't maybe the best night.
Maybe not. Yeah.
For you for this, but at least you've done it. and you're persevering with it because you are clearly seeing some benefits from it, although they may not be the benefit that you initially
Exactly right. Yeah,
thought
yeah.
you were going to
That's
see.
right. Yeah.
But it's innovation like that that I want to see more of in the industry, from conveyancers, from agent, from everybody. Because what's happened, we've got lockdown in March. Everybody sort of, panic button. Everybody was obviously buttoned down, etc. And there was a lot of talk of being able to do this, change, and all. And then, of course, we got unlocked fairly quickly in May. And in the estate agency world, and I don't think it's any different in all the stuff that links to it, everybody went back to operating the way they were. And that's a missed opportunity. And of course, as we're starting to see, more sort of mini lockdowns and sort of different tier, bit of a missed opportunity for some people, because that was a great opportunity to change a little bit.
I do think in law firms in general there has been a change. I would say majority of the people we now deal with would have moved into the paperless arena, where they wouldn't have been before. I think the legal industry is behind. We've made sort of no secret of saying this before quite openly. The amount of firms that are paperless, for example, I'd be surprised if it was 50% of registered law firms. But personally here, we made mass strides and massive investment as well during that lockdown period.
But I think it's a really important point though, Stu, because I was just going to sort of interject and say, at a point where firms went to the wall because they had so little fat on them that they went to the wall during lockdown. A lot of conveyancing firms, I think, just wouldn't have had the ability to invest.
No, we must wait. And that was the point I was going to go on to make. That's what we did. But having said that, as a business, it's very, I find it very sort of uncomfortable in being critical of others, where you're entering into a lockdown period that, of course, at that time, we didn't know it would be 2 months. It could have been 6 months. It could have been 8 months. Christ knows how long. So you could have, on the other hand, said, we were crazy to invest money in terms of, IT, and, everybody's now got sort of 3-4 screens on their desk rather than 1 and 2 and all this jazz, So it's difficult to be critical of others in a period that is so, unusual and that's never happened before.
There are still staff in conveyancing that are furloughed. I'm still hearing stories of people being furloughed, and yet on the other hand, we're hearing that the volumes are, where they are, and they're operating on, lower numbers of staff. People were furloughed in estate agency, but they were brought back fairly quickly. The problem that estate agents are going to face, of course, and indeed everybody else in the industry, is estate agents work on a no move, no fee basis in the main, and unless those deals go through, they've got the costs, and suddenly they could face a brick wall in terms of income. And again, one of the things that I feel that the industry needs to do is get its structures slightly more aligned than they were. So conveyancing, there are no move, no fee type conveyancing operations out there, often dictated by the estate agent or the introducer as part of the scheme. We used to do that at Connells, and I'm sure it still applies. But fees need to go up. Fees need to go up, but the alignment needs to be closer. So if we're going to go to legal ready type process where people, get the ball rolling when they put a property on the market rather than waiting until they find a purchaser, for example, that involves some work. That involves doing some stuff. Again, the conveyancers have got to embrace that rather than say, well, no, look, just hang on, wait until you find a buyer, which I still hear stories of. And from a cost point of view, does the customer start paying for this stuff then? Or is there a model that should evolve which says that it's paid for out of proceeds, i.e. on a no move, no sale fee? Now, these are commercial judgment calls, and it'll vary, but without it, it won't happen.
Like we use something here called a fast move service that we must have sort of been punting this for more than 6 years. And we would stereotypically go in to see an estate agent to court their business. We would get that business. But the uptake from the estate agent was very, very, very minimal on the fast move service, which is a different take on the logbook. And we deal with other companies of a similar ilk. that offer similar products. But again, when you go in to see, you know, the average, should we say, estate agent, the uptake to do something different is very, very low. And I pose the issue here: is the conveyancing process broken, or is the home buying process broken? And I think it's the latter. I don't necessarily. I think we are the easy target, and I think some of the points you make are extremely relevant. I think there are a lot of law firms that operate in an extremely archaic way still. But I do think that we are the easy target. And as far as I'm concerned, there are plenty of lawyers out there that would love to embrace property logbooks. I personally have not come across anybody that thinks that's a bad idea. I think perhaps, you know, the way we do it and the involvement with our sort of regulatory bodies, I personally would like to see it at a higher level, because I think if it was brought in a proper manner, I don't think there'd be any objection to doing it that way. But part of me does seem to think that it's not just the conveyancing process that's the issue here. And a point I've made before is, you know, we deal with a vast array of different types of estate agents, from the traditional to the online to the mix of the two, and so on and so forth. And, you know, it does seem to be, and I'm not knocking estate agents as a generalisation, but it does seem to be that there is part of their process which I would equally say is broken. And it's the two together that make the dragged out sort of, you know, issues that we can often have.
Yeah. Estate agents are far from perfect, and I agree with you. You know, the lister, the guy who goes out or girl who goes out and wins the instruction, brings the property back on the market, is usually incentivized to do that, but not necessarily to do anything else. You get, you know, which is why you see agents overvaluing and cutting fees to win business and all this type of stuff. And there is a weakness there. There is a, you know, right across the board. Now, there's some good ones, there are some bad ones, and there's everything in between. It does need people to sit back, and I work obviously with estate agents as well. And where they are embracing this sort of thing and getting on top of it and making sure their staff are trained, understand the benefits, etc., it starts to work. Where they don't do that, it won't, because, you know, the average negotiator at the front end of it doesn't think that far ahead down the transaction. In fact, if they're the lister, they may only be paid on taking instructions on, not on what happens to the thing subsequently. So that's, you know, clearly a nonsense. So we've got to join these things up. You mentioned the home buying process, and I agree, it is a home buy. You'll be familiar with the home buying and selling group that exists, which I'm a participant in. So there's a lot of work going on there with all sorts of stakeholders across the industry. Very well intentioned, but obviously it has no clout other than, you know, sort of PR and whatever. There's a lot of commercial efforts going in now around the country, different people trying to do things, logbooks or mini hips or whatever you want to call them. The phrase hip, unfortunately, is obviously, you know, not well regarded, although I was an advocate of keeping it. I wanted to see it develop. I was not anti-hips, because with consumer protection regs and with speeding up the process, it's actually what's a version of it is what is needed. As yet, we haven't got it.
Problem with hips though, Mike, I mean, at this rate, the way hips are going, the only hips we're going to get are replacement ones, aren't they? Because we're all going to be old enough to remember when they first came out. I think the problem with hips obviously was the lenders not accepting a survey done by the seller. But I'm slightly conscious of time, Mike. But one thing I did want to, you know, maybe sort of conclude with is, because you've obviously mentioned the home buying and selling group, and I think, you know, as you know, Stu has said, you know, we're not out to knock anybody, because any initiative to try to improve, you know, the home buying and selling process is a good one. But, you know, again, we've seen today, and property logbooks, everybody says, you know, yes, obviously. But, you know, 4 organisations, I think it is, that are involved in logbooks now have set up sort of, you know, frankly, yet another association. They've called themselves the Residential Logbook Association. And as I say, I admire anybody that takes up the metal. Please don't get me wrong, this isn't a criticism. But I worry, is the market just too full of groups and associations? Is all of this just too dispersed to make a breakthrough, Mike?
it is fragmented. We know it's fragmented. I mean, you've got Rob Halstone, who I'm sure you know well, setting up Bold Legal Move or whatever, which is the same sort of thing. You've got Gazelle out there with reservation agreements and whatever. You've got the sort of modern method of auction type sales and that sort of online. There's a myriad of stuff out there, and it is at the moment completely reliant on commercial entities, basically, or groups of commercial entities to try and drive change. At the very basic level, just getting a vendor to pull together the sort of TA6 stuff, that some documents, find the certificate for the double glazing from underneath the bed, and all this type of stuff would help. And that's an education piece. So I think the fact that we're talking about it, the fact that there's stuff going on, there's the fact that there's some people trying to make some things, is good news, because it will start to hopefully educate people that actually we ought to be prepared. I don't particularly want to see legislation, I've got to be perfectly honest. But the only way you'll ever get mandatory sort of application of any of these things is if that was there.
So what would be perhaps to conclude, Mike, because it's been fantastic to talk to you and hear your views, what would be for the coal-faced conveyancers, the people running, the medium to smaller firms who perhaps arguably are under greater pressure in a way, what would be your one piece of advice or your one plea to them then? What is achievable? What can, not find, 250 grand to invest in a bit of kit, but what would you say is your one piece of achievable advice that conveyancers can do to help improve the process or their own working environment, however you want to put it?
I would say make sure the business you're doing is profitable. So don't take on business that you're not going to make any money out of. So if you take a good hard look at your P&L and decide whether you're making any money doing what you're doing, and if you're not, either get out or change it.
Yeah.
Don't take on more work than you can handle, because that's one of the biggest crimes. And one of the biggest things we made sure we did at Connells was we managed the solicitors' silos, the conveyancers' silos, so they weren't overworked, because they take on too much work, and of course service levels go out the window. Now at the moment there is probably more work than people can take on, but actually put your fees up, do something to make sure you're managing the workloads. And the last key bit is communicate. Now, however you do it, whether it's updates, links to case management systems, telephone calls, whatever, if you've got an introducing estate agent, I imagine conveyancers still moan about the fact that they get hundreds of phone calls from negotiators saying, what's going on, which is stupid.
Mike, right, just to interrupt you on that one point, we don't moan about getting calls from estate agents. What we moan about is getting a call from an estate agent on a Monday, and when we give that estate agent that piece of information, what we moan about is when we get a call on the Tuesday and they've done nothing with that information, because the point is, why bother asking me the question if you do nothing with this information? And that's what we moan about.
And the education of agents understanding the process so that they are making calls. It's ridiculous phoning the same solicitor every few days saying what's going on, because the thing might have moved from that solicitor and be sitting on the other solicitor's desk, and they ought to be chasing the other side or whatever. Now that's an education piece, but again, the conveyancing industry perhaps could do more to help educate their introducers. If you've got an introducer sending you quite a lot of business, don't let them make 20, 30 phone calls in a week. Agree a time slot with them to go through 10, 20 files at one time. It's a better use of everybody's time. So nothing magical, just sensible commercial common sense, but it is a little bit lacking.
I think that's a fair comment. That would be a fair comment to end on, Mike. Well, it has been just absolutely delightful to have you on, Mike. So thanks ever so much for joining us. And we really, really do appreciate your insights. So, and I hope to see you again, because actually I really wanted, we didn't really get the time. We're going to have to get you on again soon, Mike, because I want to talk to you about AML and the extent to which AML, for agents might differ to that for conveyancers, because I expect it probably doesn't very much. So I'd really like to invite you back quite soon so we can talk about.
I'd be more than happy. It's been my pleasure, I can assure you. It's good to see you both.
Thank you.
All right, take care, guys. See you soon.
Bye.